The desert sun beat down mercilessly, shimmering off the red mesas and jagged rocks of Arizona territory. Dust swirled at the hooves of the horses as a line of Apaches rode slowly into the valley, their faces painted, their eyes watchful. At their head sat Chief Nantan, proud, tall, his black hair braided, his chest marked with scars of battles won and lost. Facing them from across the valley was a group of settlers and soldiers, tense hands gripping rifles. Among them stood Caleb Ward, a cowboy hardened by years of riding cattle trails and border skirmishes. His hat was tipped low, shadowing eyes that had seen more death than joy. But there was a steadiness in him, a kind of quiet honor that made others stand a little straighter when he was near. This was supposed to be a parley. The U.S. Army wanted peace with Nantan's band, and Nantan wanted supplies, safe passage, and dignity for his people. But in the Wild West, peace was as brittle as dry grass underfoot. The chief dismounted slowly, his moccasins sinking into the dust. He raised his hand to signal no hostility, then called out in broken English, "You want peace. You want no more blood." The officer in charge, a red-faced captain, nodded stiffly. "Then prove it. Show us you're willing to give something. We've had too many raids, too much blood spilled." A long silence hung over the valley. Then Nantan's dark eyes flicked to Caleb Ward, who stood apart from the soldiers, a man not bound by uniform, but respected by both sides for his fairness. Something unreadable flickered in the chief's gaze, then he gave a sharp whistle. 2 braves dismounted, dragging someone forward from behind their horses. A girl stumbled into the sunlight, thin and frail, her dark hair tangled, her dress torn. Her eyes were clouded, pale as smoke, sightless. A jagged scar ran across her face, pulling at the corner of her mouth. Her arms trembled, one hanging stiff at her side, as though once broken and never healed right. The soldiers shifted uncomfortably. The girl swayed, her bare feet bleeding from the rocks. Nantan's voice rang out, mocking and cruel. "Here. You want proof? You want peace? I give you my daughter, broken, blind, worthless." He spat in the dust. "Take her, cowboy. Take her to your people. She will eat your food, shame your house. She's nothing to me." The braves shoved her forward, and she stumbled to her knees in the dirt. A hush fell. Even the captain seemed taken aback by the savagery of it. Caleb's jaw clenched. He saw the way she trembled, her chin lifted in defiance despite her weakness. She was no child, perhaps 17, maybe 18, but her body was wasted by hunger, her spirit battered yet not fully crushed. The captain turned to Caleb, sneering. "Ward, you're a man of the border. You take her. If she's nothing, then it proves the chief's words. And if she's trouble, well, put her down." Laughter rippled among the soldiers, cruel and thoughtless. Caleb's eyes burned into Nantan's. A man don't mock his own blood. The chief's face hardened, but he said nothing. Caleb stepped forward, his boots crunching in the dust. He knelt beside the girl, who flinched at his shadow. Slowly, carefully, he touched her arm. She jerked back, her cloudy eyes wide, unfocused but fierce. "Easy, darling," he murmured, his voice low, gentle. "Ain't nobody gonna hurt you while I'm standing." She stilled, listening to the tone if not the words. For the first time, her trembling slowed. Caleb rose, turning to the soldiers. "I'll take her, not because she's worthless, but because no soul deserves to be cast off like a broken tool." The captain scoffed, but Caleb's gaze silenced further jeers. He slipped his arm under the girl's frail frame, lifting her as though she weighed no more than a bundle of sticks. She stiffened, but her head turned slightly toward his chest, as if she could hear the steady drum of his heart and found some anchor in it. As Caleb mounted his horse with her in his arms, Nantan called out, his tone dripping with scorn. "She is your burden now, cowboy. May she drag you to the earth." Caleb didn't answer. He simply turned his horse toward the distant line of cottonwoods where the settlement lay. Behind him, the laughter of soldiers and the cold silence of Apaches followed like vultures. The ride was long and hot. The girl said nothing, though her breathing came shallow and strained. Caleb could feel her bones through her torn dress, the weight of starvation heavy in his arms. At last, when they reached the shade of the trees, he reined in and spoke softly. "Name's Caleb Ward. You got a name, darlin'?" For a long moment, nothing. Then, barely above a whisper, came the answer. "Nia." Her voice was cracked from thirst, but it held a quiet dignity that surprised him. "Well, Nia," Caleb said gently, "you ain't worthless. Not to me, not ever." Her blind eyes lifted toward his voice, as though searching for truth, and though she could not see, Caleb knew she was measuring him in a way deeper than sight. That night, he made camp beneath the stars, laying her down gently with a blanket, building a small fire to chase the desert chill. She ate little, sipping water slowly, but her shoulders eased slightly as she listened to the crackle of flames and the low murmur of his voice telling her the constellations. Above, for Caleb Ward, it was the start of something he did not yet understand. For Nia, it was the first time since her world had gone dark that she felt perhaps she had not been thrown away, but found. And in the wild heart of the desert, where hatred and pride had mocked her as blind and broken, a new vow took root. One, forged not in scorn, but in quiet, stubborn love. The first morning light spilled across the desert, gilding the mesas in red and gold. Caleb rose before dawn, as he always did, his body moving out of habit, but when he looked to the blanket beside the fire, he felt a shift in his chest. The girl, Nia, was curled tightly beneath it, her blind eyes closed, her face soft in sleep. For the first time since he had seen her, she looked less like a cast-off and more like a person simply resting. He set coffee to boil, the bitter scent drifting on the air. She stirred at the sound, her head tilting toward him. "You're still here," she whispered, as if she half expected him to vanish like a cruel dream. "Reckon I am," Caleb said, handing her a tin cup with careful hands. "And I'll be here tomorrow too." She took it in both hands, fingers trembling as she sipped. "Why?" The question cut deeper than he expected. Why indeed? He could have walked away. The chief had meant it as mockery, burden a cowboy with a broken daughter. But Caleb wasn't. Raised to throw folks away, not even the blind, not even the broken. "Because you matter," he said simply. "Maybe your father couldn't see it, but I do." Her breath caught, and though her pale eyes gave nothing, her lips pressed tight as if she was holding back something, pain, or perhaps hope. By mid-morning, they reached Dust Haven, the nearest settlement. The town stirred with activity, wagons rattling, blacksmith's hammer ringing, children chasing each other through the dust. As Caleb rode in with Nia seated carefully before him, heads turned, whispers followed. "That's one of Nantan's girls. Blind as a bat. Look at her eyes." Ward's gone soft taken in a squall like that. The words were meant to sting, and Caleb felt the heat of shame for them, not for Nia, but for the cruelty of men too small to understand compassion. He reined his horse hard, glaring at the crowd. "She's under my roof now," he said, his voice cutting like steel. "Any man got a problem with that, he can settle it with me." The whispers died quick. Nobody wanted to test Caleb Ward's iron. He guided Nia down from the horse, her small hand gripping his arm tightly. Where are we?" she asked, her voice trembling. "My place," he said, steadying her steps toward the cabin. He had built with his own hands years before. Ain't much, but it's safe, and safe's a start. Inside, he set her on a chair while he stoked the hearth. She ran her hands over the wooden table, the smooth edges, the woven rug on the floor. He saw how she mapped the room with her touch, claiming it inch by inch. "I'll fix the barn so you can walk without worry," he told her, and I'll make the place easy for you. You won't be stumbling here." She lifted her chin, a flicker of pride breaking through the shyness. "I don't want pity, Cowboy." Caleb smiled faintly, tipping his hat back. "Ain't pity, just respect. A man's home ought to fit the folks who live in it. You live here now, so I'll see. It suits you." That night he cooked beans and cornbread, simple fare. She ate carefully, her fingers fumbling with the spoon, until frustration flared and she nearly dropped it. Caleb reached across, steadying her hand without a word. She breathed slow, then tried again. By the end of the meal, she was smiling, small, fleeting, but real. Days stretched into weeks. Caleb kept busy with the ranch, but always made time to guide Nia, teaching her the layout of the cabin, the yard, the corral. He tied bells to the goats so she could hear where they wandered. He carved a walking stick from cedar, sanding it smooth. One afternoon, he found her outside, hands brushing the rough wood of the barn, face tilted to the sun. She looked fragile in the light, yet unbroken, like a wildflower pushing through stone. "You're not afraid," he said quietly. "I've been afraid all my life," she replied. "But if fear is all I have, then I am nothing. You treat me like I'm someone. That makes me want to be." Her words struck deep. Caleb, who had lost family in border wars, who had buried friends on the cattle trails, felt something stir in him he hadn't dared in years. Hope. But not everyone shared it. In town, men muttered. Ward's gone loco, giving his name to a squaw. At the saloon, a rancher spat. She ain't even whole. Blind. Useless. He'll ruin himself keeping her. The words reached Caleb's ears, but he never flinched. When one drunk stumbled too close, sneering about savage trash, Caleb's fist sent him sprawling across the bar. "She's got more worth in her little finger than you'll find in your whole hide," Caleb growled. "Remember that next time your tongue gets loose." The fight only fanned whispers, but it drew a line clear. Nia was under Caleb's protection, and none dared cross him openly. Back at the cabin, she sensed the tension in him one evening as he sharpened his knife by the fire. "They don't want me here, do they?" He paused, then met her blind gaze. "Don't matter what they want. You're here, you're mine to protect, and I'll stand against the whole territory if I have to." Her lips trembled, but she reached out, finding his hand. Why go so far for me?" Caleb swallowed hard, feeling the roughness of her fingers against his calloused palm. "'Cause you're not a burden, Nia. You're a blessing. Maybe the world can't see it, but I do. And I swear, you'll never be mocked as broken while I got breath in me." Tears slipped from her blind eyes, but her smile was radiant, fragile and brave all at once. That night, as the desert winds howled outside, Caleb lay awake, staring at the rafters. He knew trouble would come. From the town, from Nantan, from anyone who saw her as less than human. But his decision was already made. He wasn't keeping her out of pity. He wasn't shielding her for duty. Somewhere between her first whispered, "You're still here," and the fragile smile she gave when she tasted cornbread at his table, Caleb Ward had given her more than shelter. He had given her his heart, and soon he would give her his name. Spring crept slow across the Arizona desert. The mesquite put out pale blossoms. The creek ran stronger with snowmelt from far mountains, and the air smelled of new grass. For Caleb, it meant long days of mending fence and branding calves. For Nia, it meant learning to walk the land she now called home. At first, she stayed close to the cabin, leaning on the cedar staff he carved. She traced walls with her fingertips, counting steps with quiet whispers, mapping the space in her mind. But Caleb encouraged her, guiding her hand along fences, placing stones at turns so she'd know the paths. "Every sound's a landmark if you listen," he told her as they walked the corral. "Hear the creek? That's east. Hear the windmill. Squeaking? That's west. Learn the music of the place and you'll never be lost." She tilted her head, listening to the wind clatter through dry leaves, the distant lowing of cattle, the flap of the chicken's wings. For the first time since she lost her sight, she felt not trapped, but oriented. The land was not an enemy. It was a guide. One afternoon, she startled Caleb by walking from the cabin clear to the corral without his arm. When she reached the fence and laid her hand on the post, she turned her clouded eyes toward him with a triumphant grin. "See?" she said. "I can." His throat tightened. She could not see, but she could live, and she could shine. Their evenings grew into rituals. Caleb would read from an old battered Bible by lamplight, his deep voice rolling through the verses. Naya, headbent, would memorize them, her sharp mind soaking in every word. Later she began reciting them back, her soft voice weaving the lines like songs. It filled the cabin with a peace Caleb hadn't known since boyhood. Sometimes, when his work left him bone-weary, she would hum old Apache lullabies by the fire, her voice low and haunting. The music softened his rough edges, pulling him into sleep with his hat tilted over his eyes, and in those moments she was not broken at all. She was whole, more whole than most. But the world outside their cabin walls had not softened. Dust Haven whispered still. Men spat when Caleb passed. Some women crossed the street when Nia walked with her cedar staff. They saw not courage, but shame in her presence, not beauty, but brokenness. One Saturday, Caleb brought her into town for supplies. She walked steady at his side, chin lifted though her eyes were sightless. At the general store, a rancher's wife whispered loudly, "Poor fool, leading a blind squaw around like a pet." Caleb's fists clenched, but before he could answer, Nia turned her head toward the sound. Her voice was quiet but sharp as a knife. "Better blind and honest than seeing and cruel." The woman flushed scarlet, turning away. Caleb grinned despite himself, pride burning in his chest. Nia was finding her fire, but fire attracts enemies. One evening, as Caleb mended tack in the barn, riders appeared at the edge of the ranch. 3 men, hard-faced and armed, with dust on their coats. He knew them, ranch hands loyal to Pike. The railroad man Caleb had crossed before. "You're a fool, Ward," their leader sneered. "Keeping that Apache girl. Folks say she's cursed. Better send her back to her people or you'll bring trouble down on your head." Caleb's jaw set like granite. "She's mine now. You tell Pike or whoever else that if they lay a hand on her, they'll answer to me." The man spat in the dirt. "Then trouble's coming, cowboy." They rode off, but the warning lingered like a storm on the horizon. That night, Caleb sat at the table sharpening his knife. Nia sat across from him, sensing the tension in his silence. "They came, didn't they?" she asked softly. He looked up, startled. "How'd you—" "I can hear it in you," she said, tilting her head toward him. "The way your breath sits heavy. You think you hide it, but you don't." He let out a long breath, leaning back. "Yeah, they came, said you don't belong, said I should send you back." Her hands curled in her lap. "Maybe they're right. Maybe I'm a burden, blind, half-broken. Maybe—" "Stop." His voice cut sharp. He reached across, catching her hand in his calloused grip. "Don't you ever say that. You're no burden, Nia. You're the best thing that's happened to this place since rain." Her lips parted, trembling. "Why do you say that? You could have any woman, whole, sighted, strong. Why me?" He studied her, the firelight flickering against her pale eyes, her scar, her fragile frame, and yet she was more than all of it. "Because you're brave," he said finally. "Because you stand tall, even when the world tries to shove you in the dirt. Because when you smile, it feels like hope." Her breath shivered out of her, and tears welled in her unseeing eyes. Slowly, she reached across the table, finding his face with gentle fingers. Rough stubble scratched her touch, but she traced his jaw as though learning him by feel alone. You are my eyes, Caleb," she whispered. and my strength." He covered her hand with his, pressing it against his cheek. His heart pounded like a runaway horse, but he knew then that he was lost, and gladly so. That night, as the coyotes howled in the distance, Caleb sat on the porch with Nia's head resting against his shoulder. The desert stretched endless and wild before them, full of enemies and hardships. But for the first time in years, Caleb felt he wasn't alone in facing it. And Nia, blind and scarred, cast aside as worthless, began to believe in a truth more powerful than her father's scorn. She was wanted, she was loved. And soon, whether the world spat or applauded, Caleb Ward would make her his forever. The days after Pike's riders came were thick with unease. Caleb could feel it in the way the wind carried dust across the range, in the way his cattle stirred at night, restless and spooked. Nia sensed it too. She moved through the cabin quieter, her ears tuned to every creak of wood, every distant hoofbeat. He tried to shield her, working longer hours, double-checking every latch and lock, riding the fences at dawn with his rifle across his lap. But there was no hiding the storm. Trouble was circling. It broke one night. The first sound was the frantic bray of a mule. Caleb bolted from his bunk, grabbing his Colt. Firelight flickered through the window, too bright, too close. He burst out onto the porch, and his gut clenched. The barn was ablaze. Flames licked skyward, devouring the roof, sparks raining down on the dry grass. Shadows of men on horseback ringed the fire, their laughter cruel and sharp. Pike's men. Caleb ran, rifle raised. "You sons of—" A shot cracked, the bullet slamming into the porch beam inches from his head. "Stay back, cowboy," a voice jeered. Pike himself rode forward, his fine suit catching the fire's glow, his smile like a knife. "This is just the start. Give up the squaw and maybe we let you keep your life." Nia appeared in the doorway, her white eyes wide, her cedar staff clutched in her trembling hand. Caleb's heart seized. He shouted over the roar of fire, "Get back inside, Nia!" But Pike's voice carried, oily and mocking. "See? She hears but don't see. Blind and broken. You marry her, and you'll be broken too." The men roared. With laughter, Caleb's fury boiled over. He fired. One rider dropped, screaming. The others scattered for cover, pistols flaring. Lead sang through the night, tearing splinters from the fence posts. Caleb ducked behind a trough, chambering. Another round, his eyes blazing. From the cabin doorway, Nia's voice cut through the chaos. "Caleb!" He dared a glance. She stood tall, her hair lit with firelight, her face pale but defiant. She raised her staff like a spear. "Don't let them take me. Don't you ever let them." His throat tightened. "I swear it."